Welcome to episode 1 in the first of this episodic series exploring the fundamentals of rhythm. Throughout the videos in this series, I'm going to explore, discuss, analyse and teach some rhythmic fundamentals, everything from the real foundations right up through to some more advanced concepts like polyrhythms, cross rhythms, subdivisions, tuplets and all of the rest. Each episode will tackle a specific concept and it will be broadly sequential, so later episodes will draw on the fundamentals that we establish in the earlier episodes. In this first episode, I'm going to be discussing what I consider to be the most fundamental concept, and that is meter. For the purposes of this video, and this series of videos in general, I'm going to broadly differentiate between the terms meter and time signature. Now, in common usage, meter and time signature are sometimes used interchangeably, synonymously. For this video and this series, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to define meter as a broader concept which includes the time signature, but also concepts of the beat, tempo, rhythmic landscape, and all sorts of other things broadly associated with the overall rhythmic structure. Time signature is the time signature specifically. And I think it's helpful to broadly differentiate between these two terms. So meter is the general concept of the rhythm, the beat, and all of those other things, and time signature refers to the time signature specifically. I have chosen this topic because I believe all other aspects of rhythm rely on this fundamental grounding. Without this base, we can't build onto the future topics. So I consider meter, time signature, the beat, these things to be absolutely fundamental to understanding all of the other aspects of rhythm. So in this video today, we're going to be exploring three specific topics, three specific concepts that are all linked to this concept of meter. And these are the aspect of representation, notation as representing the beat. Then we're going to explore time signatures themselves, and finally the concepts of binary, ternary and odd meters generally. So notation as representative of the beat, time signatures, and binary, ternary and odd time generally. These three concepts will come together to broadly define this concept of meter, and it is on this basis that all other rhythmic concepts are built. So the concept of the beat is possibly the most fundamental one in all of music, not only rhythm, all of music generally. It is generally accepted by musicologists that we can't have a rhythm until we have a beat. Rhythm of any kind, from any time in history, from any culture in any part of the world, in some fundamental way is connected to a beat. The problem is, musicologists going all the way back to Plato struggle to define exactly what the beat is, and I'm not going to get down that rabbit hole here today. I'm going to broadly and simply define the beat as a regularly occurring pulse, and these are equally spaced. And the pulse is measurable by a tempo. So essentially we've got two key points. It's regularly repeating, and its frequency is dictated by a tempo. And this tempo, as we know, is measured by beats per minute. So with this broad definition in place, we can consider any regularly occurring pulse as a beat, and we need this to be in place before we can start plotting rhythms against it. Now, if we consider our notational hierarchy, the way we write music down, we start to get a clue as to how rhythms are built and how they are based on the beat. The first thing we need to do is assign a particular note value to represent the beat. And once we have got that in place, all of our other rhythmic application falls into place. So if we consider the notes we use, we start with this whole note at the top. And this whole note doesn't really have any inherent value of its own. It is simply a whole note, this hypothetical whole that we can consider like a complete circle. With this whole note in place, all of the other notes that we use get their value. And this is based on a structure of halving or doubling. And this will become very important in what follows. So if we start with our half note, we halve the note and we get two half notes. We take our half note, we halve it, and we get two quarter notes. We halve a quarter note, and we get two eighth notes, and so on to 16th notes. And all of these notes with their values are derived from halving or doubling of the notes above and below them. So if we consider quarter notes generally, which are probably the most common type of notes for most common applications, a quarter note is a quarter of a whole note. And as we know about quarters, there are four of them. So we have four quarter notes to a whole note, two half notes to a whole note, 8 eighth notes, 16 16th notes. So we can see how the whole terminology of how we talk about notation and how we define notation is based on being a value relative to this whole note. So with this hierarchy in place, we can assign one of these note values to represent the beat. And this is our starting point when writing any form of rhythm or music in notational terms. We now come to the topic of time signature, and this is probably one of the most misunderstood concepts in all of music, and it is something that I know gives a lot of my students specific types of headaches as they're trying to get their head around the time signatures that I'm asking them to play. Time signatures are actually very simple when you have a strong understanding of them, and they are actually here to help us. They are a functional, pragmatic tool that is there to convey information about the music they are playing. So they are not there to be difficult. They are not there to make your life harder. They are actually there to make your life easier when trying to interpret the music you are being asked to play. A time signature conveys certain pieces of information. It conveys how many of a certain note type exist within a bar, and this in turn gives us a value for each bar. And it also gives certain implications about how the music in that bar is structured, the groupings, the overall rhythmic feel. So first of all, we need to understand the anatomy of a time signature. And as we know, there is a top number and a bottom number. The top number is very, very simple. It is a quantifier. It tells us how many of something are in a bar. So if we just consider the top number in isolation, in 7/8, that 7 is telling us there are 7 of something in a bar. In 4/4, that top 4 is telling us there are 4 of something in a bar. In 5/4, there are 5 of something. In 15/16, there are 15 of something in a bar. In theory, this top number can be anything we like. It can be any number. There are pragmatic reasons why it wouldn't be certain numbers, but technically there's no reason to say it can't be any number. The bottom number is the one that often trips people up because people misunderstand what it is there for. The bottom number is essentially acting as a reference, and it is acting as a reference to one of the note values we already talked about. We talked about how the note values we use are derived from a whole note. So because it is a whole, we assign the whole note a value of 1. Because it is a half and there are 2 of them, we assign half notes the value of 2. Because they are a quarter and there are 4 of them, we assign the quarter notes a value of 4. 8 for eighth notes, 16 for 16th notes. So when we encounter these time signatures, that bottom number will only ever be a 1, a 2, a 4, an 8, a 16, or in rare cases, a 32. I'm not going to get into sort of experimental modern time signatures right now. We'll just stick to the traditional time signatures for now. That bottom number is always going to reference one of these note values. So if the bottom number of a time signature is a 1, it is referencing whole notes. If it is a 2, half notes. If it is a 4, quarter notes. An 8, eighth notes. 16, 16th notes. So with this in mind, with our top number combined with our bottom number, we can derive a very simple sentence that will allow us to understand any time signature with which we are faced. There are top bottoms per bar, and we replace the top with the top number and the bottom with the note value it is referring to. So in the case of 7/8, there are 7 eighth notes per bar. In the case of 15/16, there are 15 16th notes per bar. 4/4, there are 4 quarter notes per bar. 3/4, there are 3 quarter notes per bar. 6/8, there are 6 eighth notes per bar, and so on. At this stage, that doesn't convey any other information than a total value as to how many notes are in each bar. Just because a time signature is telling us there are 4 quarter notes in a bar doesn't tell us what the rhythms are, doesn't tell us how those quarter notes are divided, doesn't tell us anything about how that bar sounds, other than the total value of the notes in that bar will equate to 4 quarter notes. Now, I stated that the time signature does actually convey more information than this. So this brings us on to the final topic here, which is binary, ternary, and odd meter. And this is where it starts to get a little bit more interpretational. This is where it starts to get a little bit more pragmatic. One of the fundamental concepts at play with time signatures is that there is no correct or incorrect. There is only suitable and unsuitable. When we have a strong understanding of rhythm, of time signature, of meter generally, we can actually, with a little bit of sleight of hand, write any rhythm in any time signature. It is possible to do this with all the array of notation, tuplets, polyrhythms, over the bar line playing. We can write any rhythm in any time signature, and it is neither correct nor incorrect. What it may be is unsuitable, inappropriate, unproductive. So time signatures, as I've said, are here to serve us, to serve a function, which we will come on to shortly. Now, time signatures are divided into binary, ternary, or odd time signatures, and these make fundamental statements about the rhythms that they include. We begin with binary because it is the most common and the most simple to work with. Binary, as a word, refers to things that are in groups of two. We think of binary code as zeros and ones. There are two elements that make up all of the other things included. So this gives us a clue about rhythms based on a binary meter. Binary is based on two, and we start with the quarter note itself. We know a quarter note to be a quarter of a whole note, and we know a quarter note to halve into two eighth notes. By very definition of the terms involved, a quarter note contains two eighth notes. Two eighth notes combine to create a quarter note. They are of equivalent value. We then have an eighth note that contains, by definition, two 16th notes. A 16th note, by definition, contains two 32nd notes. So every step on our notational structure is based on groups of two. Two half notes in a whole, two quarter notes in a half, two eighth notes in a quarter, etc. And when we look at some simple rhythms, we find that this halving or doubling is at the heart of everything we do. Now, as far as this applies to time signatures, any time signature with a 4 on the bottom is, of course, referring to quarter notes. This is by default, by necessity, a binary time signature. In essence, the simplest way to think of this is binary time signatures have quarter notes representing the beat. And because they have quarter notes representing the beat, our rhythm is binary. It's like a circle. In common parlance, we call these rhythms straight. This is straight time. Everything is based on 2s and 4s and 8s, a doubling or halving based on the initial division of the beat into 2. And this again comes from the very definition of a quarter note. A quarter note, if it is representing the beat, contains two eighth notes, which divides it in half. Everything is based on that initial two-note grouping. Things get a little bit more complicated when we deal with ternary. Where binary time signatures represent the beat with quarter notes, ternary time signatures represent the beat with dotted quarter notes. And the crucial difference here is, of course, that dot. A dot added after a quarter note, or any note in fact, extends its value by 50%. So where a quarter note by definition contains two eighth notes, a dotted quarter note by definition contains three eighth notes. A dotted eighth note by definition contains three 16th notes. A dotted 16th note by definition contains three 32nd notes, and so on. Everything goes from a grouping of 2 to a grouping of 3. Now we have a little bit of a problem here when it comes to writing this with time signatures. There is no fraction that represents a dotted quarter note. So when we start writing ternary time signatures, we have to use the eighth notes instead. So we take a very common ternary time signature like 6/8. Think about what we said earlier, there are 6 eighth notes in a bar. But these eighth notes are not used to represent the beat. They are simply giving us the total value. If we think of 6 eighth notes, we can arrive at 6 eighth notes using 2 dotted quarter notes. Each dotted quarter note contains 3 eighth notes, so we have our 6 and they are divided into 2 groups of 3. 1 under, 2 under, 1 under, 2 under. This is implied in the use of the ternary time signature 6/8. We can consider an extended ternary time signature like 12/8. Yes, there are 12 eighth notes in the bar, but they are not representing the beat. Those 12 eighth notes are arrived at by the use of 4 dotted quarter notes, and each of those dotted quarter notes contains 3 eighth notes. 1 under, 2 under, 3 under, 4 under. So we have an equivalence here between binary time and ternary time. Let's take the time signature of 4/4, which is a binary time. The quarter note is representing the beat and it contains 4 quarter notes. But those 4 quarter notes are each divided into 2 eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. An equivalent ternary time signature is 12/8. There are still 4 beats in the bar, but those quarter notes have become dotted quarter notes, each containing 3 eighth notes. 1 under, 2 under, 3 under, 4 under. For now, suffice it to say that 12/8 is the ternary version of 4/4, where binary time signatures include quarter notes, ternary time signatures include dotted quarter notes, odd time signatures, by which I specifically mean prime number odd numbers, contain a mixture of both quarter notes and dotted quarter notes. So we take a common time signature like 5/8. Going back to what we said at the beginning, there are 5 eighth notes per bar. But we don't generally think of this as having 5 beats in the bar. We generally think of 5/8 as containing 2 irregular beats, and they are made of a grouping of 2, the quarter note, and a grouping of 3, the dotted quarter note. And crucially, these are all the same speed, because the time signature is referring to the eighth notes. Those eighth notes all occur evenly spaced within the bar. So we have the 1-2 grouping for the quarter note and the 1-2-3 grouping for the dotted quarter note. 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3, and we have a very simple rhythm in 5/8. We can reverse the order, so begin with the 3, 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1, and we have our 5/8. Ultimately, time signatures exist to fulfill a role. They need to be functional, they need to be practical. So in one sense, if we're dealing with, let's take 5/8 because it is a simple odd time signature, what is the purpose that the composer wrote in 5/8? Most commonly, though not necessarily, it is because the musical idea that they are trying to express comprises a group of 2 and a group of 3. 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3, or its reverse, 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2. 9 times out of 10, that will be the case. That is the reason that 5/8 exists. Now, we could say, what if I want 5/8 but without that particular grouping? What if I just want 5 beats per bar? 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5. Yes, we can do that. That is not a problem, and that might be a choice a composer makes if their musical idea happens to be 5 notes long. So we have to make a decision here as to what best interprets the music we are trying to express. Now, before I close, let's just think about how we recognize these. First of all, any time signature with a 4 on the bottom is a binary time signature. That is always going to be dealing with quarter notes, so by necessity is always going to be dealing with binary straight time. It doesn't matter if it's 3/4, 4/4, 5/4, 21/4, whatever it may be. As long as that bottom number is a 4, the meter, the way the bar feels, is always going to be straight binary time. If the bottom number is 8 and the top number is not a prime number, then it is ternary. 6/8, 12/8, 9/8, 15/8. We can divide those into groups of 3 and we find our ternary pulse. So 15/8 is just 5 groupings of 3. 1 under, 2 under, 3 under, 4 under, 5 under. But it doesn't have to be. And this brings us to what I'm just going to close with now, the final function of it and a case study. And it is pertinent to the number 15. I recently wrote a piece of music for the snare drum called Numinous Measure. And I derived the idea from 3 groups of 5. And this was before I had any inklings as to the time signature I was going to use. The basic phrase was this. 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1 2 3 4 5 1. You can hear that accent pattern there. Blah da 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 blah da 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 blah da 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 blah is quite clearly 3 beats to the bar divided into groups of 5. So I had 2 choices here. Do I write this in 3/4, 3 quarter notes to the bar, and assign each quarter note a quintuplet? I will deal with tuplets later on. Or do I explore different options? In the end, I decided to write this piece in 15/16. Now that is an uncommon time signature, but that 15/16th notes divides into 3 groups of 5 without the need for a quintuplet. So this was a pragmatic choice. If I write in quintuplets, every single beat of every single bar, before I've even written any rhythmic figures, requires a quintuplet to establish that base subdivision into groups of 5. And that gets very, very tricky very, very quickly when we start dealing with more complex rhythms. We get nested tuplets, which is a little bit difficult to read and a little bit difficult to work with. So for the sake of brevity, I went with an uncommon time signature that allowed me to establish 3 groups of 5/16th notes without the need for quintuplets. And once you get your head around why has he chosen 15/16, well, it's 3 beats to the bar and each beat contains 5/16th notes, it makes sense. Unfortunately, we don't have a note value and therefore a time signature that actually accurately represents quintuplets. Now, there is some work being done currently about new time signatures, composites or compound time signatures, all these different ways that we can play with this plus this time signature. I'll get into those later on. But for now, the main takeaway here is, first of all, we have notes representing the beat. Second of all, those notes represent groups of 2 or groups of 3. And finally, the use of the time signature, which establishes the overall meter, is a pragmatic choice. You have to choose which is the most suitable to convey the rhythms, the music you are trying to express. So the next time you're faced with a certain time signature and you're scratching your head, the first question should be, why has that particular time signature been chosen? If it's 7/8, it is most likely that the rhythmic idea is based in 2 groups of 2 and a group of 3. It is unlikely to just be 7 discrete notes, because that would kind of suggest we could maybe do it better in another time signature and use tuplets. But ultimately, the point here and the basis on which all future rhythms and all concepts will be built is on the beat, the time signature, and the meter. I hope you found this useful. Thank you very much for watching. Please check out my website for more details, and I hope to see you on the next one. Thank you very much.